Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for what I know will be a very interesting and lively session. I'm Tricia Hackett with the North America region of the International Urban and Regional Cooperation Program. Financed by the European Union, the IURC is a global program bringing together EU cities and cities from across the globe to cooperate and collaborate and learn from one another on sustainable urban development topics. This is the first session in a series of webinars. We will focus on renovation wave strategies and more specifically social housing retrofit programs developed in IURC cities. With these sessions, we are aiming to build a virtual peer-to-peer working group of cities to share and learn great ideas, best practices, successful pilots, new policy frameworks, and innovative solutions from one another. Before I go any further, I'd like to request that you write in the chat box and let us know your name, your city, and your organization, title, department, anything you'd like to share with us along those lines. And you might even write a specific interest that you have in the topic that we're talking about today. Also, I would like to recognize that today is International Women's Day, celebrating and recognizing the social and economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. And as we are on the topic of energy transition, according to the OECD, energy poverty is a worldwide phenomenon with a strong gender dimension, as energy is a primary source of greenhouse gas emissions. Extending access to green energy and promoting affordability can therefore be central to more inclusive and sustainable development. Women can also play a key role in green energy transition and help accelerate the transition to low carbon by promoting clean energy and efficient energy use, as well as tackle energy poverty. So back to the regularly scheduled program. Thought that was important to say today. And before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to ask that as you have questions today, please add them to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, preferably not the chat box. And if you'd like to ask a question live, as in with your video and or audio, we're happy for you to do that. So just let us know in the chat box and then we can give you permission to use your microphone and camera. And also, this session is being recorded. We'll share a link afterwards along with the presentations, and it'll also be available on the IURC website. Now I'd like to introduce our first presenter, who is Melissa Jort-Conway, who will be sharing with us the big picture and big plans for which energy efficiency projects are being undertaken in the City of Ottawa. Melissa is a planner and the Climate Change and Resiliency Unit with the City of Ottawa with a master's degree in environmental studies. She's worked on strategies to build capacity at the local level to advance solutions to climate crisis through developing policy, regulatory tools, and stakeholder engagement on projects that include climate change, master plan, Ottawa's community energy transition strategy, and the new official plan. And Melissa, I'd like to say, has been involved in the IURC program, not only in this phase, but also in the first phase as our lead contact in the city and steward, I guess, with the City of Ottawa's participation in the program. So really happy to have you here with us. Melissa, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Tricia. It is such a pleasure to be with you guys today. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I'm very honored to be amongst other champions working on energy efficiency as such a great topic, so important for all cities. I just wanted to say a few words to set the context before Dan's presentation as a planner with the municipality, with the City of Ottawa. Municipalities play a very important role in catalyzing low emission actions for community buildings. We're responsible for land use planning, infrastructure approvals, and also the building code enforcement. So we do play a significant role. And our city council has been quite active since 2019. We've approved quite a number of plans, programs, policies, and projects that support the transition from fossil fuels, building heating sources to more low carbon and renewable options. And to lead into Dan's presentation, I'll just say that the municipality plays an important role to catalyze action, but it's not only the municipality's responsibility. It lies amongst, the responsibility is shared amongst the corporation, but also collectively amongst all of our partners, as well as property owners and our citizens. Change slides. Oops. So these are basically our greenhouse gas emissions within the City of Ottawa as of 2020. Our next inventory update will be reported on this April for 2021. Between 2012, which is our baseline year, and 2020, we saw a decrease in our emissions by 15%. Per capita, from approximately 7.1 tons of CO2e per person to 5.6. That decline in emissions has largely been attributed to the provincial phase out of our coal plants, as well as more electricity generation and consumption. But the COVID-19 pandemic played a significant role also in reducing our emissions, particularly within the transportation sector, where we saw a 30% reduction in gas consumption in 2019 and 2020. So this basically is a pie chart as shown on the left. You can see buildings and transportation account for roughly 90% of our emissions. And I think that's a trend that is shared collectively amongst all cities. And the largest contributing source of emissions, especially related to building heating, is natural gas. These are our targets that were approved by the City Council in 2020 as part of the Climate Change Master Plan. We have short, mid, and long-term targets to reduce emissions, trying to achieve a target of 100% reduction by 2050 for the community and by 2040 for the corporation. And these targets align with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's target to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this is just to give you a sense as to the challenge that lies ahead for us. It's basically 5 to 6% per year over the next 5 to 10 years to reach our short-term targets. So there's a significant amount of emission reductions that we need to reach in a very short amount of time. What we tried to do is break out the amount of emissions reductions across various sectors. And so what I've shown here is to reach our targets, you can see the amount that contributes towards existing buildings. So Dan's presentation is championing solutions to try to reach those emission reduction targets. Collectively, you can see existing buildings and new buildings make up quite a large share of the amount of reductions required. And then here, I'm just going to speak quickly to these approved municipal support programs. And if you would like more information about these, I'd be happy to give you more information. But we have a number of municipal support programs related to the building sector that have been approved in recent years. We have a Better Homes Loan Program, which offers low interest loans to residents for home energy improvements. We have 27 million allocated in funding, and we've got over 900 projects already in the queue to be funded. We have a Better Building Strategy, which is more on the commercial and institutional side and large multi-unit residential buildings. And we're aiming to try to reduce emissions from those buildings 50 to 60% by 2040. So there's some strategies there to try to advance, such as energy labeling, benchmarking, and things like that, that we're trying to institute. We have a new high performance development standard, which imposes mandatory building energy performance targets for new buildings, and that's coming into effect this year. We have also the zero emission municipal building projects, and that's hopefully coming into effect next year for our municipal buildings. And we're also trying to enable more district energy systems throughout the city. So I'll stop there and thank you so much. I don't want to take time away from Dan's presentation, and I will turn it back over to Tricia.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa. It's so important for us to have both the big picture of it, and I think that it's very much about what the IURC program is about. We very much are working within the context of big goals and big policy frameworks, but also have the opportunity to see how those connect to, very much on the ground, if you will, projects, which is the segue into Dan. But thank you so much for that, the context. It's so important to situate ourselves, and really impressive what Ottawa has already achieved and plans to achieve. So good luck with that. That's a lot of ambitious and important to be ambitious in these times. So our next presentation today will be given by Dan Dicaire, who will share with us the approach that the Ottawa Community Housing is developing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and how that integrates and impacts the community at large. Dan is an engineer and certified energy manager who works for Ottawa Community Housing as a manager of energy and sustainability. He has coordinated an installation of a lot of solar arrays on 37 different OCH sites and managed a portfolio-wide LED lighting retrofit. He's also developing a zero greenhouse gas retrofitting strategy for over 15,000 units and 4 townhomes. So, Dan, you sound like you're a busy guy. Over to you, and we're really excited to hear more about the deep energy retrofits.
Perfect. Well, I'm very excited to be here and very much happy International Women's Day. This is it's really fun to have an international audience on this day. And thank you very much, Melissa, for your introduction, because as you're going to see, you need strong municipalities and to partner with strong building owners and developers in order to be able to achieve anything here. And what I'm hoping today is that I'm going to help. We're trying to help municipalities champion deep energy retrofits because, as Melissa pointed out, the buildings that we need to retrofit already exist. So a quick hello. My name is Dan Dicaire. A little bit of my credentials here from the past. But today, my goal is to give you a little bit of the housing context. Now we're going to take it down from the whole city into, one large building owner. We're going to talk about how the strategy that we're using and our pilot project, which was the Presslin Net Zero Panelized Retrofit, and hopefully sharing as much of the lessons learned from that project as wide as we possibly can with all the deep energy retrofit tools that we've kind of assessed as we were doing this pilot and that we're trying to develop as we are moving forward to scaling from 4 tiny units to actually trying to apply this to 15,000 units, eliminating 27,000 tons of CO2 that we emit annually. And really, the goal here is to inspire you to champion deep energy retrofits in your community. I know that the audience here is a lot of municipal players, so hopefully this gives you a little bit of context of what are the pieces that we need to get into place. So I spend my days at Ottawa Community Housing, 15,000 units of social housing, and 2/3 of which are over 60 years old and spread out in buildings and communities in about 160 buildings and communities. So it's a very wide area that we have to manage, about 17 million square feet overall. And those 17 million square feet, well, they consume about $25 million of annual utilities between our water, our electricity, and our natural gas. Now, We've been doing a lot of work in the sustainability department over the past 12 years, and it's been what you'll call more your low-hanging fruit and your more typical life cycle, but we've managed to make a really big impact. The picture on the left that I always love showing is one of our project managers standing on top of 3,000 toilet seats. We've done these water-saving retrofits across the entire portfolio, LED lighting retrofits across the entire portfolio. We've also installed over 625 kilowatts now, so we're over half a megawatt, and with on schedule to have by 2024 about a full megawatt of generation across 40 sites. And overall, that's been saving us about $59 million over the past 12 years. So that's the historical context, if you will. That's what energy efficiency, I'll say, used to be, but now it's changing very, very much. There's this very big pressure on the housing affordability issue, which is we've got a bit of a housing crisis. And I know this is Ottawa, it's Canada, and I'm sure that it's very similar throughout the world. We've basically got a fairly, flat earnings in terms of different sectors of the economy. Right now, this shows for 25 to 34-year-olds, but we've got an increasing cost of the average home price. So the issue that we're having right now is that our services are becoming more and more necessary, but our buildings are getting more and more old. And at the same time, this lovely slide that Melissa shared with us already, we've got these climate pressures. That is, well, those same buildings that we need so badly because of their affordable housing, we can't get rid of them, we can't displace the people, but we also have to eliminate their GHG emissions. In fact, it represents about a third of our emissions that we need to be eliminating. So when we take all of that together at OCH, we looked at this and said, well, maybe there's a chance for a bit of a community renewal. You take a very big holistic approach. You don't try to deal with these problems individually. If you look at it as a whole, there is a huge opportunity here, maybe to hit 2 or 3 birds with the same stone. And that's what we tried to do with our Presslin net zero prefabricated deep energy retrofit. So what we had before was a block of townhomes, so 4 units, 2 stories, brick build, 1960s build, very, very typical. And we've got about 500 of these right down the street. It's a kind of a similar template that we used. The building consumed about $7,200 worth of utilities annually and emitted 18 tons of CO2 annually. Now, the approach we took is to make this building net zero. So what you have on your screen now is the same building in 2021, now emitting 0 tons of CO2 annually, being net zero in terms of its energy consumption. But also the tenants were in the building while we did this retrofit, because as I mentioned, very big housing pressures, we couldn't really move them out anywhere. So we're going to switch to how did we do this? Well, very quickly, I'm going to share our video, a time-lapse video of the work that we did on this building. So everybody can see my screen? Yeah. So now this is 197 to 203 Pressland, 1960s build. As I mentioned, we dug all the way down to the footings to expose the foundation, which meant we could replace the weeping tile and make sure there's no more water issues into the basement. But that also exposes the foundation, which allowed us to waterproof it, but more importantly, to make sure that it's completely to put an air barrier across it. We then brought insulation all the way up to the foundation. So there's already 8 inches of insulation below grade. Then we cut out those holes, which allowed us to install a beam that once we bring that insulation above grade, we're going to be able to install above grade panels on top of that. And that goes all the way around the entire perimeter. What you're seeing now is our staff in a makeshift workshop putting together these huge 20 by 9 foot panels. And these are SIPS panels. So it's 8 inches of insulation sandwiched between 2 sheets of OSB. And we're trying to make these completely finished panels. So you see them putting the air barrier membrane, you see them putting strapping, you see them putting siding on it so that it's really finished with the windows and the doors cut out to be delivered to site. So we've got a completely new building envelope. We've got about 24 of these panels. Now you're seeing us install those onto the building. So we were able to install about 8 panels in one day with our staff using our little telehandler there. And that goes all the way around with those 24 panels. Now that's going to reduce the overall energy consumption. So we can go into the basement, take out the natural gas furnace and the natural gas hot water tank, replace them with heat pump hot water tank and a heat pump furnace, which by the way, now means that our tenants have central cooling, which is a very big bonus. When we go to the roof, we continue that air barrier all the way up to the roof. We put it over the existing roof, and we also add pitch so that we're able to add 16 inches of insulation. But now that new pitch also gives us a perfect orientation to add solar. So there's 34.8 kilowatts of solar on top of that roof that allows us to generate as much energy as we consume in a year. So when we look at this holistically, we've changed the entire building envelope in order to reduce the energy consumption. We've replaced the mechanicals with more efficient mechanicals, and we're able to generate as much energy with that solar array as the new building consumes, giving us our 0 rating on the NR Guide chart, which is exactly what we did. So now I'll jump back to our presentation. Perfect. There we go.
That was very impressive, Dan. You're like speaking at the cadence of the time lapse.
I know. I've done it a few times.
Also the project, of course, but the presentation really, really impressive. Jumping in there. Okay.
So we're lucky enough to be done our monitoring period. So now here are the results. What we have here is the pre-retrofit consumption. So it was natural gas and electricity. So these are in kilowatt hour equivalents, but 118,000 kilowatt hours is what it consumed before. But now when we move, you see that we've got our post-retrofit. We've reduced the energy consumption of that building by 66%. That's what a deep energy retrofit is. You've got to go past that 50%, in my opinion, up to that 60%. And then that solar generation generates pretty much exactly the same amount as the new building needs to consume in a year. We had a 45 kilowatt discrepancy, but that's basically 0.5%. So we're calling it net zero overall. So now, some of the tools that we use to be able to do this and how we're trying to scale this in the future. Oh, perfect. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a technical, and I'm not going to go into too deep of a technical here, but the approach that we use here is energy sprung. It's essentially an NR-fit retrofit for people who are familiar with the Passive House Standard. This is a concept that has been explored, and so we're not reinventing the wheel here. This is not an OCH idea. It has been done, and it is being done by many people. There's also people in Nova Scotia and out in Alberta that are also doing this type of a retrofit. And what I'll point people to here is the Natural Resources Canada's prefabricated exterior energy retrofit guide. So we've been working with Natural Resources Canada. That's part of this project. Was they also help fund this. The goal is to develop the recipe book that anybody can pick up anywhere in Canada, in all honesty, anywhere in the world, so that anybody can do this. As you saw, these are great staff that did this, but the skills that were used to produce this are readily available within the industry is kind of the point that I'm trying to make. It is not rocket science for experienced architects, engineers, and contractors to put this out. And we could probably do an entire session on the technical aspect, which I'm told we might do in the future. So that's the first part of the toolbox. It's the technical point of view. The second, the question that we always get, absolutely, that was a beautiful video, Dan. How much did it cost? So overall, it was over $1 million to do these 4 units in a pilot context. And if I might also add, we did this 100% during the pandemic. We started this project in May 2020. So it was definitely some interesting financial pressures. So what I'm showing you here, this is probably a good representative breakdown of where your money goes when you're doing a project like this. That building envelope is going to take up about a quarter of that retrofit. You're going to have another quarter portion, the red, green, and there that are the electrical and the mechanical portion. And then you're going to look at some professional services as well as some contractor services, whether it's outside labor or some of the minor subs and things like that. So when you're imagining that, you got to see, okay, this is where some of that money is going to go. There are fantastic grants and incentives and partnerships, as Melissa mentioned earlier. Here in Canada, I realize they're not necessarily relevant everywhere in the world, but there's a lot of these different things. And I assure you that our governments, as they're trying to hit their targets, they're creating these types of incentive programs, partnerships, or grants for us to access that type of money to accelerate this. But the biggest thing that I want people to remember when they think, how much does it cost? they have to remember, how much is it costing you in terms of your status quo? Because doing nothing does cost us something. And that's the most important part of the financial toolbox, is the total cost of building ownership. What I'm showing you now in that status quo on the left is what this building was going to cost us if we did nothing to it. This was planned capital work in red, and the planned utility costs with an escalation in green. And I mean, there are other things in there, but we can clearly see those are the vast majority of the costs of this building were already baked into its existence. So people have to realize there is a cost to doing nothing when they think that it's very expensive to do something. So let's compare that to our deep energy retrofit. So on the right, we've got a very large initial investment that I'm putting up there. So that's our major building renewal. And once again, we still do have maintenance and repair in red throughout the years, because what we're doing doesn't last forever. But what we have eliminated is that green utility costs throughout the years. And when you add all that up, you take a net present value of that first column, the existing buildings, 18 tons of GHGs emitted every year, and it's going to cost you $2.5 million over the next 60 years. That is what it is going to cost. That is the status quo if you do nothing. Now, that deep energy retrofit with solar that I just showed you, so 0 GHG emitted now, a net zero energy, it's only going to cost you just above $2 million. So we're able to save, by doing this, we're actually saving $500,000. And this is with the current, I'll call them pilot pricing. I often also I've put two more scenarios there where somebody says, hey, let's just do the retrofit. Let's not put the solar because we're just going to electrify everything. Well, that's probably going to cost you more in the future because of that electricity purchase. That energy cost doesn't go away. Although you have eliminated the CO2, you haven't eliminated the utility cost. So that can be a more expensive exercise in the long run. And then that last column suggests, hey, we did this with, I'll call them inexperienced at this particular task trades. This was a brand new, this was a pilot project. If better trades, people that are more used to this, or when they do 1,000 of them, you get some economies of scale with maybe a 30% drop. Maybe you can save $1 million over your status quo, and then that can be used to fund other projects. And in fact, when we look at this kind of math, we say, hey, that $1 billion that we need to do our portfolio, we can actually go find it within the savings, even in the pilot numbers. We can go and see that there's about $2 billion of savings that we need to, that we can capture. So that's the first one that I want to make sure everybody understands from the financial point of view. The next is you're going to need people who are going to do the work. So that market development portion is something that communities and different levels of government need to have in the background of their minds. The way that we're trying to do this is we're actually working with some government organizations. We're trying to engage manufacturers. They need to know that we want these products, these high performance products that I just showed you, the windows, the building envelope, the heat pumps. We need to send them some market signals. So we're engaging with them, telling them we want 10,000 of these units in the next couple of years in order to hit our targets. We're also talking to trade organizations, which are basically member organizations, as a way of them also interacting with us and maybe them reflecting on our specs. So as we're telling them, hey, we think we need this type of window, they're like, if your goal is energy efficiency, do this and this, and I can make that window for half the price of this other one that you're wanting, and it'll still give you maybe 80 or 90% of your performance, right? And the last piece that we're also looking at is aggregating demand. So we are talking with other social housing. So OCH has 15,000 units. Toronto has 30,000 units. Hamilton has 7,000 units. Windsor, which I also saw was on the call, has over 35,000 units, 3,500 units. We can aggregate our demand together, and that's just social housing. You can get into the commercial sector. You can get into the private homeowners. If we're able to aggregate that demand to send those signals to the market, regardless of where you are in the world, that's how you're going to show the business case. And then you don't need to try and sell your energy project, because the manufacturers are going to come and show you the products they want to sell you for that large demand. And then one more, this kind of merges the technical, the market development and the financial, the ESCO model. So this is another tool in our toolbox, because one of the biggest things that I hear is lack of capital, ongoing maintenance for this new technology that I'm not familiar with, and labor to do that type of maintenance, right? All of those things are very reasonable concerns. And one of the solutions to that is an energy service contract model to fill that gap. Now, effectively, it's the same thing as renting a hot water tank, but there are models where we could be aggregating demand and doing partnerships on a community level for some contractors to provide, as opposed to they are currently selling us natural gas, for example, and they're investing in the infrastructure to deliver that natural gas across the city. Instead, they could be selling us BTUs and mining those BTUs from air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps that they install on our property, the exact same way that they install a natural gas hot water tank in the building. So the way that when we are out of capital in some of these situations, we're looking to this energy service contract model to get contractors to produce the capital, because they're going to capitalize it, they're going to maintain it. We're just going to buy the utility from them and just get our normal utility bill, rather than us taking on that large capital and then us having to pay back that large capital with our savings. They're taking on that type of responsibility. And that is the perfect model to expand the business case from a catalyst market or an anchor client like a social housing to private companies and to homeowners. Because imagine once you've got 15,000 of these all across the city, well, then it's very easy to offer a similar product at a similar rate to a homeowner, where if a homeowner tries to do it on their own, they're one out, like there's no economies of scale, there's no business case for the contractor to take that on. Last part I'm going to touch on is the human approach. So obviously we're making these buildings for people to live in. We have to be conscious of the people that are living in our buildings. So the housing crisis, I have no doubt that anybody who's going to be trying to do this, moving your tenants out is probably not going to be a realistic approach. Private homeowners who'd want to be doing this are going to need to live in their houses while this happens. So we don't really have free units to shuffle people around, and we can't lose social housing to disrepair. So we have to do this, and we have to figure that out. But yes, it's going to be disruptive. The majority of the work needs to take place while the tenants are in place. But we also have to remember that we have a responsibility to minimize the impact of utilities and the increase of utilities costs due to carbon tax and things like that on our tenants. Because in some of these cases, we own the furnace, but the tenant pays the utility bill. And in that case, the tenant can't replace that furnace in order to avoid their GHG liabilities. There's going to be a partnership there. And you can also see why I mentioned that when Melissa was talking about the city having a municipality having a role to play, it's everybody needs to get together to see this as a whole. The black box needs to be around the entire community, not just around just one house. And the last plug that I'm going to make, another tool for the human aspect, is the well building standard. This is a building standard that is centered around health and wellness, as well as ensuring equity, and it's a people-centric design. And the concept is that, you know what, we're going to spend 90% of our time in buildings. Those buildings should positively impact our health and make sure and be designed for equity and enjoyment of the people that they house. So, and just a little bit of one of the things that I'm realizing when we talk about 5-year payback periods or 2-year payback periods, it's like, not really. We're at this point where we need to start looking that society is only going to grow great when its citizens plant trees whose shade they'll never enjoy. A lot of the stuff that we need to do right now we may not see the result, but we know that it needs to be done, or else we're going to run out of time. So that was it for me. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'll pass it back to Tricia.
Wow, thank you for that fantastic presentation, Dan. I love the time lapse, and it was so comprehensive. And you take a topic that is very technical, and you know, really are able to convey in your presentation, make it real. And of course, there is at its root, there's a technical side, but actually it's about humans and people and place, and you know, and it's great, you know, kind of incredible before and after photos. So you have what it means for greenhouse gas emissions. You know, we know that that's important. We can kind of get lost in that, the technical side of that, but actually seeing like the change in where people are living, and the investment that the city is doing in residents, and you know, and that connection to the kind of the whole community, you know, economies of scale. So there's so many different things to unpack there. Thank you so much for that. And I asked the question, you actually prompted me because we had talked about maybe doing something. I mean, the idea of these sessions is we throw a lot out there, and then we see from our cohort and peers what would be interested for them to learn more about, because this is, you know, this is a spark of conversations where we can go deeper. And so I know we've seen in the, so I posed that in the chat, and I know there's some interest from some members of our audience to hear more. And so they've heard you offer it, Dan. So
Hey.
Yeah, so we will definitely follow up and plan a more technical, and we'll find out exactly kind of what people's interests are, and yeah, we'll do some follow up there.
If we want to get the
so
engineers into the room, we'll do a technical.
Exactly.
We can do a more technical session.
Yeah, yeah, we can have a chat with those who are interested. We'll follow up with you to see exactly kind of what aspects to make sure that, you know, it's the best use of everybody's time. But that's a generous offer, Dan. I really appreciate that, and again, Melissa as well, for the, you know, the contextualizing of the work on housing and greenhouse gas and energy reduction, energy efficiency, and how that fits into the big plan in Ottawa and at a country level as well. And talking about other cities, including cities that are in our cohort. So now we're going to jump across the Atlantic. And we're fortunate to have with us here today Paloma Bozman, who's from Zaragoza, which is also a city that participated in the first phase of the IUC program. Last time around was paired with Chihuahua, a great partner for us in the program. And of course, this is a EU-funded program, an EU program, and so it's very important for us to bring the EU perspective. We had a chance to talk to Paloma before the session and hear about kind of some of the synergies that are happening with Ottawa, but also some obviously some big differences there as well. So let me introduce Paloma. She's from the City of Zaragoza, Spain, and is responsible for European and innovation projects in the municipality social housing company Zaragoza Vivienda, Zaragoza Housing. She has a master's degree in urbanism and has been responsible for European projects with Zaragoza Vivienda for over 18 years, managing projects related to renovation in old and historical cities, focusing in sustainability, energy efficiency, participatory processes in social housing tenants, and renewal of resources in residential buildings. And one thing that we know is that there's much less public housing stock in Zaragoza, as a lot of it was sold off, and she'll tell you more about that. So I think that's a big difference. But what resonated for me was thinking about the economy of scale that you talked about, Dan. I wonder if it could be the other way around in Zaragoza, where it's more retrofitting in the public sector that could benefit the smaller stock of public housing, social housing. Anyway, over to you, Paloma. Look forward to hearing from you.
Hello to all. Thank you very much for inviting me for this session. I wanted to contrast a bit what is the context in Europe and in Spain. So I will go very quickly about what the goal that Europe has put on us in the countries. And well, I will introduce myself. As Tricia told, I've been working in European projects since 2004 in the municipal housing company, Zaragoza Vivienda. The European context tells us from 2015 with the Paris Agreement that Europe has to take into account that almost 50% of the Union's final energy consumption is caused by heating and cooling in buildings. So that's going to be established like a big priority to promote the energy efficiency, making use of the energy efficiency first principle. Then we have the Green Deal presented by the Commission that has like 3 priorities. One of the priorities is the renovation of the public buildings. And we also count with the multi-annual financial framework from Europe that goes from 2021 to 2027. And in the middle of that, we have the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and the Next Generation Recovery Funds. That gives the countries, the European countries, the opportunity to establish a recovery plan. In Spain, it's called España Puede, establishing the main policies to focus on what Europe wants. We have to work in the first policy that goes about urban and rural agenda, combating the population and developing agriculture. And we have a specific policy that is towards promoting housing rehabilitation and urban renewal plan with a big budget of 6.8 billion. Then I wanted to just make a quick focus of the Spanish context. In Spain, we have 25 million dwellings in 2020. Most of our dwellings are in condominium buildings, which means that we have to require agreements between all the owners to act in the common elements that affect the buildings, and that, of course, you have to act on them to promote the energy efficiency. The 10-year status of Spain is that 77% of our main dwellings is in ownership, in condominium ownership, and only 17% is rented. And also another important fact is that almost 60% of the Spanish homes predate the first Spanish legislation requiring minimal levels of energy efficiency, which means that they are inefficient from an energetic point of view. Zaragoza is quite representative of the Spanish cities. We are the 5th city of Spain. We are between Barcelona and Madrid. And we have the same kind of housing picture. We have 327,000 dwellings in multi-owner buildings, what we call condominium. And again, we need a specific percentage of agreement of all the owners to retrofit the common elements of the buildings. 79% of the homes are private, and only 15% are rented. Only 3% of the rent is protected in the city. I have put in red what Zaragoza Vivienda, the municipal housing company, has and manages. So we manage 2,500 social rent dwellings, which means that we can act in that housing stock directly, but we have to promote the retrofit of the private sector. Again, the Zaragoza represents the Spanish context, in that sense, 59% of our housing stock is inefficient, was built with no insulation. Another important factor in Spain is that we have a lot of empty dwellings inside the city. 10% of our housing stock is empty. I've marked in red the eldest buildings of the city, the more inefficient from energy efficiency point of view. Europe tells that in order to accomplish the goals of becoming a neutral emission city, we have to increase the level of refurbishment following the European goal in the Green Deal, 3% of rate. And currently our annual rate of renovation is under 1%. So what we do, the City Council has the special tool that is us, Zaragoza Vivienda. We are the municipal company that has to promote the urban refurbishment policies in the city through the specific municipal grants and also European funds to promote both the public and the private, but we are now focusing more in the private refurbishment of the housing stock. As you have seen, it represents the main goal to promote the building stock in the city. Our goal is to promote the modernization of the oldest and the less efficient or less accessible housing stock by means of public funds through public subsidies that generate also private investment. And how we do this, we are strongly focusing in municipal subsidies. We have different lines of subsidies that promote interior refurbishment in building, the common elements of the building, and of course require an agreement in energy efficiency. We have another line, removal of barriers in buildings, buildings without lifts, We have complementary subsidies for low income population that complement line 1 and line 2. And we also have specific lines to promote refurbishment works inside the dwellings, the private part of the dwelling. How we do this? We do this through our general office that gives subsidies in all the lines, always conditioned to energy savings. We make very strong efforts to inform and to obtain the required documents, agreements, and grants between the population. And we also do the supervision of the works. Here you have some pictures of what we are doing in the most inefficient buildings of the city, the ones that were built in the 60s, before and after. And we also are now working strongly in the National Recovery Plan that was brought after the pandemic with the national plan. We're working in the district program that we have selected 4 areas we are going to focus on. Now in the first phase, we're going to work just in 3 of them because they are technically suitable, because we have the recovery plan. It's focusing on energy reduction. So we have to reduce in a 60% the non-renewable primary energy. We have to act and help vulnerable population because there is special grants for vulnerable population. And we also need to do it fast because the first phase is between 2020 and 2023. So we have to select the high level areas where the maturity is strong and the communities of neighbors have already shown some interest in order to spend the grants in the next coming years. Now we are in the first phase, working in 3 districts. We are promoting agreements between the neighbors. We are trying to reach the maximum grant. The grants depend on the energy savings. The maximum grant per dwelling is 21,400 euros. We are also working with special tools that have allowed us with the Next Generation Europe program, because now we are promoting the book of the building among the neighbors. That is like a roadmap of the building that is subsidized and tells the neighbors what they have to do in order to reach the energy savings. We are also detecting and working with the most vulnerable population who will have 100% of grant. So the retrofit in the condominium building will be free for them. And we are also working in the tax reductions related with the recovery funds. And that will be all from the Spanish demo case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paloma. That was also a lot of information in a short amount of time. It was great presentation. And there's I just want to ask the audience now if there's anyone who either wants to raise your hand and you have the possibility to either ask live the audio, or if you write questions in the Q&A, we can answer. I can read them out. Take a breath. I think it's really interesting to see the different context between Ottawa and Zaragoza, and I know you've had a chance to visit one another, which is a great opportunity. And I'll ask a question. I'll throw a question out just quickly while maybe people are thinking that if you were able to identify, because I wasn't on the study visit between your cities, were you able to identify any practices that your city, one city is doing or the other city is doing that you might be able to pilot or influence something that's happening in your own city, either direction or both?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, Trisha. And I think when Paloma was in Ottawa, we had a specific session with Dan, and we were looking at that prefab retrofit project specifically. It's interesting to see the difference in terms of the climate implications for these retrofits. I'm interested to know if the retrofits in Spain are more for cooling, or is there a demand also for insulation for heating? So I didn't get that answer
That's a good question.
when I was in Zaragoza, but I'll ask it now.
Good question, Melissa.
In Spain, we are acting. The first phase we are acting is in reducing the energy demand of the buildings very strong, with the common elements of the buildings. And it's quite tricky because with this condominium, what we find in the eldest buildings is that each owner has a different system of heating and cooling. So what we are trying to work in is an energy communities with the PV panels on the roofs. So we try to produce renewable energy to all of them. And in this first phase, because if we promote acting both in the installations, in the cooling or heating installation, then the price of the intervention is so high that we won't obtain the agreements. They agree with the general elements to reduce energy, but they don't want to change the individual heating pump or gas boiler until it will stop working. So what we are trying now is to promote renewable energy in order to, first of all, reduce the demand, and after have renewals in their private individual systems. It used to be more important for them, the heating system. That's the first one they will act. But now with climate change, cooling is getting strongly increasing as a demand. But in our 3 levels will be common elements and reducing the energy demand of the building, and then renewals to individual systems. And in our 3rd phase, we will try to centralize, but we are not in that stage yet.
Thank you, Paloma. We have a couple of other questions that have just been posed in the Q&A. Karina Richter from City of Windsor has asked about how, obviously this is a general question, but how residents in the updated, remodeled, retrofitted buildings, how they responded to the updates. We would imagine that they're super happy, but I guess the real world is more complicated than that.
And how about that? That's why I have that slide about, like, it is disruptive. That is, we have to realize that people are unfortunately living through a construction zone, and we can get better at timing things and more experienced, but people will still be living in a construction zone, so you have to be very conscious of that. However, the goal is to improve. So if you talk about this from a building renewal point of view, rather than just a energy efficiency point of view, you can, hopefully they like the new look of the space. They enjoy that they're eliminating their GHGs, whether that's important to them or not. But if I will say that the biggest selling point was the cooling. All of these buildings did not have central cooling before. And first weekend, so our May Long 2-4 weekend, in spring, I remember the first weekend where everybody was like, we've got central cooling, and a lot of the problems that we had throughout the project were forgotten immediately when they realized that they had cooling. So you got to make sure, maybe the simplest way of saying it is make sure that there's built-in things that the tenants want into these renewable projects, so that there is something in it for them, because you are going to be very much impacting their lives.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense. Paloma?
I'm going to get what Danny says, get things that people want. In our case, the eldest buildings, the ones that I was showing in the photos, they don't have a lift. And what they want is the lift. And that requires big retrofit works. We have to plan very well, because we try, depending of the condition of the buildings, we have to demolish the staircase. And sometimes we have to ask them just to leave the house for 1, 2, 3 days. If everything is planned smoothly and you talk to them through our office and you say, okay, we are going to try that everyone has a plan B for these 3 days, because the staircase will be demolished, so won't be able to go in and out of their house.
Yeah.
Everything goes smoothly. Of course, the lift rises up the price of the retrofit. We are trying to focus on the energy efficiency, but they want the lift and the energy efficiency. So that's a big, that's why we are working very strong in subsidies. We have a special subsidy for lifts. And of course, for us, as we've been working in these neighborhoods for several years, the best ambassadors are the other neighbors. So we from time to time, we do technical visits with the communities of neighbors that they want to retrofit, and they go and visit the other ones. And nothing is better than a neighbor that is living in a retrofit building talking about the comfort of his new home. Then they are the best advisors for us.
Fantastic. That's great. We just have a few minutes left, but we have somebody in our audience. Susan, I understand that you're going to give Alex Minella, who is with the City of Aurora in Illinois.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Alex. Alessandro. How are you?
I go by Alex,
Nice to see
no
you.
problem at all.
And I know that you have been working with and thinking about this issue, so we wanted to give you time, and you had a couple of things you wanted to show as well.
Yeah, just a couple of slides. I'll fly over a couple of slides. My perspective in this context would be the financial aspect, the means, the access to capital, and how the City of Aurora has worked around obstacles and fought and build a system, put in place a system that works not only for residents, but also for developers and future residents in Aurora. So if you allow me, I'll share with you a couple of slides that to me are pretty meaningful as to how the City of Aurora tackled that issue. So let me see. Let's share my screen if I can find my mouse. Okay. See. So let's start with framing the discussion. First of all, years ago, about 5 to 6 years ago, we recognized that there was a strong demand of housing. But that didn't really pair with the conditions of the asset, the real estate asset. And we needed to, face the issue and find the solutions. But as we recognize those issues, we also find additional obstacles. And we try to be creative to find a way to get tools that we could use on a daily basis to get from point A to point Z. And we found that throughout the process, we built a culture that works, and we can reiterate as a model for future to come. And last but not least, we'll summarize what the perfect recipe in our environment is. So, of course, we recognize the need for a change, but the change only takes place when there's a transformation. But this transformation needs to come from within, from the bottom up. More often, if you try to dictate a change or dictate a direction, to take a direction, you might fail in your goal, in your objectives. So we need to build a consensus. We need to build a system. We need to bring forward the expertise, relationships, and what that took us to recognize obstacles. And one of them was The bureaucracy, well, too much paperwork, too much of talking and no actions. And we identified that one of the biggest issues being the access to capital, not only for residents living under the poverty level or right above, and at the same time for developers to come and spend their money and provide housing. Well, that needed to be solved. How did we do this? Well, we recognized the need for going through vetting different pro formas and act as developers, acquiring properties, renovating properties, and providing for financial tools. So this is a summary of what we call the toolkit for creative financing that leads to urban renovation. Well, of course, you need consensus. So active and proactive planning. Different departments need to come together, agree on a vision, and from there, of course, you need to spend the time and the money to create a vision, not only for a specific neighborhood, but for the city, for a corridor, and substantiate your assumption with studies. One of them was the housing study that I referred at the beginning of my presentation. And from there, well, we found that different financing tools were going to be needed. We created different micro TIFs, tax increment financing districts, which basically captured the increased value of each property, and we use those increased values as capital for funding projects, renovation, rehabbing projects. And on top of it, we provide.
Alex, sorry to interrupt. We're running just a little bit over now. So if you could wrap up kind of in 2 minutes or so.
Absolutely.
I know there's a lot more there, but.
Absolutely. So these are the tools that we have used, and I'll be more than happy to go into details. Feel free to reach out to me via email. The bottom line is that we recognize that the gap, the financial gap for renovation. So if the cost of improvements are X, let's say 80, but then once the building, the property is rehabbed, that increased value is lesser than the cost of improvements, then that's the gap that we needed to fill with those financial tools listed in this slide. And then we created a culture that provided us for the perfect recipe for rehabs and providing housing opportunities for our constituents. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alex. That was a whistle-stop tour of what you're doing in Aurora around this topic, and very comprehensive, actually, in just a few slides. So it's great to have that participatory nature of this session. So thank you so much for jumping in there. And I wanted to, just before we wrap up as well, I know we don't have enough time, but Zachary in the chat had asked if either cities had experience with either complete deep energy retrofits for historical buildings where the facade needs to be preserved. I don't know if you had maybe have a quick answer, maybe more so in the Paloma Zaragoza side, and otherwise maybe you could, if the answer is yes, maybe
yes,
that could follow up with you.
We have like the best enemy is in our house, the protection of the building, historical building. So we can't act in the facade. We have to act inside the building, so inside to insulate with injection of materials or making the retrofits in the inside of the dwellings is quite tricky. And of course, you have You have to be it's like a soft, it's less impact retrofit renovation, but it's what it has to be done. You can't act in the exterior facade. And also there are some limits with renewals. Some buildings can't have renewals, PV panels, seen from the street. So we can't produce as much as we want because they can't affect to the visual impact. They can't affect to the visual impact of the building. Yeah, we have internal discussions about this. What is more important, the people living or the buildings? But we have to we have to respect the protection, and sometimes the efficiency is not as high as it could be.
That was a great question, Zachary. Thank you for posing it, and thank you, Paloma. I think that probably is at the heart of so many of the challenges that you have, the building sometimes versus the human side, and a lot of constant compromises and creativity. I'm sure your jobs require a lot of compromises and creativity and innovative thinking. So so we've gone just a few minutes over, but I wanted to get those last points of view and questions in. So thank you for sticking around a little longer. Susanna has just posted in the chat a link to like a 1 minute 30-second survey. So if people will be willing just to hop on that survey, and it helps us for future planning. To hear if this was useful for you, how we could possibly improve, or you just loved it the way it was, and we'll do exactly something similar. And then that's good for us to know as well. So that's really helpful. If you have time, we'll also send it by email, but while it's fresh in your head, please open that link. I'd like to thank Melissa, Dan, and Paloma for your great presentations, and also Alex for jumping in there as well. This has been a great session. We put out a huge amount of information. I think, we have already identified at least one topic that we know that there'll be interest in, something quite a technical session. So we'll be following up on that. We will send an email with a recording. Please share it with any colleagues that you think might be interested, a recording of the session and the presentations. And please be in touch with us if there are other things, very specific things that were covered in any of the presentations that you would like to hear more about. We can put you in touch with the presenters, with each other. The idea is that we're trying to create this as a peer-to-peer support and working group. And thank you for the team IURC for putting it together. There's a lot of behind the scenes that goes into putting one of these sessions together, and of course the audience. Thank you for joining us today. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat, and it's always nice to know that you're out there. So thank you very much. Have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and looking forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, cheers.
Thanks, Trisha. Bye-bye.